He's about to get his sucked. And love to scream right before the...
This episode of Suspenders of Belief is brought to you by Hanzo Hasashi Compounds, providing quality living spaces since 1617.
Hey guys, I'm Heavy.
Hey, I'm Trey.
Today we watched Mortal Kombat, but this time the 2021 edition.
What is this movie about?
The conflict of this movie is surprisingly simple. Shang Tsung and his cronies are hunting down Earth's chosen fighters in an attempt to win the tournament of Mortal Kombat before it starts. And in a nutshell, that's the whole story.
Yeah, it's pretty thin.
One thing I liked about it was the chosen fighters, because it's woven into the story in a natural sort of way.
Yeah.
It answers the question, why these specific people, who's choosing them.
Yeah, it's also very explicit about saying that the rules are made by elder gods.
What of Lord Raiden? If he discovers we're breaking rules set in stone by the elder gods.
Leave the other gods to me.
I'm presuming that more of the lore has been developed in the 25 years or so since the last movie. So they had a lot more to draw from when they made this film versus the 95 one.
Oh yeah, the lore of Mortal Kombat is all over the place and completely ridiculous. Again, talking about this movie, it's almost impossible to not compare it to the 95 version. And they are very, very different sort of experiences. In the 1995 version, you have a lot of real contextual fight choreography of two people physically fighting. You do have the special effects and the special attacks kind of trickled in, but they're almost more like syrup on an ice cream sundae as opposed to the ice cream itself. With this movie, I feel like it is the ice cream. It is the core of why you're watching this movie, of what you want in this movie. And I felt like that was a big difference between the two. That was really, really excellent in the 1995 version. They kind of cheat in this one. They do have some scenes that are well choreographed between the fight sequences, but a lot of times they're done through the use of a special attack or interacting with the environment. I mean, they're fun. They're very video game-y type of attacks and moves, but they're less skill-based and they're a little bit less martial arts. I know that seems like a strange thing to say.
In the original one, if you were a talented martial artist, that helped you get through that movie because a lot of it felt genuine. Well, some of the fights, the notorious one between Sonya and Kano was obviously two actors that have been fighting background. We're trying to make that scene. In this one, there's a much better choreographed fight between Sonya and Kano, but you could believe that it was just a matter of and having better people making average actors look good through this fight rather than them having to have years and years and years worth of a fighting background before they did it. The original ones, they needed to be very well blocked because they were trying to sell a more grounded fight. With this modern one, it's more fantastic, so you can get away with, oh, this is an effect shot, this is a wire work bit, this is through clever editing, we can make this look way more visceral than it actually is.
One of the big differences between the old and the new here, the 95 version versus the 2021 version, the special effects. Obviously, the special effects are much better when it comes to the CGI. The things actually look like what they're supposed to look like. Case in point, look at the 1995 reptile right here, and look at the 2021 reptile right here. And do I need to say any more?
It's great because they're both CG monsters, and normally I would knock that, but the modern reptile looks pretty good compared to the old one where he looks like a Nintendo 64 asset. It just, oof.
What about you? Anything creativity-wise stick out?
The character designs in general all are pretty solid. I do like the way all the costumes look. I like the way they cast everybody for the most part. I don't have any complaints about that, except for maybe Shang Tsung. To me, he falls a little flat compared to the actor who played him originally in 95. He's great. He can sell any line no matter how ridiculous. And this guy, when he's saying the same basic ridiculous lines, is like, maybe not.
Your brother's soul is mine. Your soul is mine.
Speaking of casting, did you recognize the actor who played Raiden?
No, he sounded familiar to me, but I didn't recognize him.
He was in Thor. He was one of the Warriors 3.
Oh, he was Hogun. Okay.
He was
cool.
Hogun.
The guy who played Scorpion, he's been in a lot of stuff I've noticed lately. Like he was in the Wolverine. He just shows up in a lot of stuff. I recognize him really well nowadays. Actually, I would complain about one more bit of casting. The guy that plays Cole, the lead character, and it may not necessarily be his fault. He's just so bland. It may just be writing. It may just be that they just didn't have enough to do with him.
Cole Young's pointless existence, his story, who he was, how he was written, why he's in this film. Even before we sat down to watch this, because you had seen the 2021 Mortal Kombat before, I had not. I was going in cold. And the first point I made was, from the trailer, the only thing that stuck out to me was they added even even more characters in this one than there are in the 1995 version. And in the 1995 version, there were already a dozen or so characters to keep up with. And there's even more in this one. Granted, some of them show up for a whopping 20 seconds of screen time, but I digress. They also introduced this Cole Young, who as far as I know is not from any Mortal Kombat game or story.
Yeah, I believe he is made up for this movie. He has a family that he is trying to protect, and early in the movie, he's like, oh, there's some weird stuff going on, people are trying to kill me, I'm going to get away from my family so that they're not a target. But then halfway through the movie, when he decides, you know what, I can't do this Mortal Kombat stuff, I'll go back to my family, it's like, they're still pursuing you, you're still drawing attention to your family that way. And then of course it's when Goro shows up and he manifests his power, so I guess it's lucky he did that.
That was definitely Raiden manipulating Cole Young because Cole Young is an idiot. Raiden put Cole Young in that situation knowing full well that Cole Young would be inspired to protect his family and that would trigger his power to manifest. That was all set up by Raiden. What's funny to think about is that Cole Young should be pissed at Raiden for manipulating him to do so and putting his family at risk, because that was all Raiden's plan. He knew that all along. That's exactly what was going to happen.
Granted, again, it's Mortal Kombat. We're not looking for, Shakespeare.
But Raiden didn't know whether or not his family was going to make it out of that situation, if Goro was just going to immediately squish them.
He is being motivated by everything else around him, so it's just not very satisfying. Whenever he got his powers, he's going to fight the bad guy, it's like, yeah, okay.
Raiden totally was playing with his family's life. Raiden did not care.
Oh, no.
Well, Raiden in general is just very overpowered. He always has been. He's essentially a god amongst mortals, so the idea of him participating in Mortal Kombat has always been a little bit ridiculous. In some versions of the game, he forsakens his elder godhood to participate in the fight, to become mortal, and in this movie, he's so overpowered that there are moments where I don't understand why he doesn't just blink, why he doesn't just send Shang Tsung home, why he doesn't just warp his enemies into space. Like, he has powers to do anything he wants. He can warp them between dimensions. Do something. He does this whole, I can't interfere, I can't interact, I can't blah blah blah, but he's constantly meddling, he's constantly interfering. So what high horse is he riding?
You question it more in this one than even the 95 one. In the 95 one, Raiden is clearly trying to only be an observer and trying to keep the peace at different times. But there's a couple of weak lines where it's like, they went to Outworld, I can't follow you there, sorry. And it's like, okay, but you're like super powerful god being, can't you just do whatever you want?
Right.
But again, you wouldn't have a movie if you could just solve everything.
Another con that I would say to just kind of the movie as a whole, it's just too long. I don't know if it's specific fights that maybe just go on a little bit too long, because there are some fights that are one move. There's a fight with Kung Lao, and it's the first interaction he has with the character he's fighting, and boom, she's dead immediately.
Flawless victory.
What was the point of this? Why even have this character just to die instantly?
Absolutely.
I think it was to pay tribute to his fatality move. It felt so pointless. And there were a couple of scenes like that you could have just removed and absolutely nothing would have changed.
Yeah, like the bit when Sonya and Kano are having a little disagreement in the desert.
You want to dance?
Sonya decides to spare him. Even when we were watching it, I'm all like, that scene happened. And I don't remember if that pays off at all. It doesn't seem like it does.
All that really has to do with anything is there's a scene where Cole Young is talking to Sonya Blade and he says, I know you've beaten him once before, but now he's got a new power, so be careful.
There were some interesting things about the settings when Kano and Sonya have their fight in the trailer. Mm-hmm. It's very close quarters. She's using the environment to her advantage, which makes sense because the whole point of that was to fight them on turf where they did have the advantage. And like there's a bit where like they're fighting in the bathroom. I think she smashes Kano's head on the toilet and she's got the shower curtain trying to strangle him, or he's trying to strangle her. And but I would attribute that entirely to like the choreographer, whoever put that fight together, because it's not necessarily in the script. You could easily just have written, and then they fight in the script, and then somebody else has to figure that part out. So there's a lot of creativity in the visual element and the choreography and things like that I definitely responded to. Like I said, the first time I watched this, I didn't really bounce off of it that much. I was like, yeah, this is fine, is what it is. I don't go into Mortal Kombat franchise expecting a whole lot. But upon second viewing, yeah, it's definitely pretty thin. But I do appreciate a lot of the superficial elements of it that work pretty well.
The final scene in the movie, it felt like it should have been a post-credits sequence.
Yeah.
There's just this tacked-on scene of him cleaning out his locker.
You're finally quitting, huh?
If it was a pickup scene, I wouldn't be surprised either.
Yeah.
Like maybe it was a reaction from test audiences. Like everyone's like, where's Johnny Cage? Why isn't he in this movie?
Right. They had a lot of character to juggle as is, so I kind of understand trying to save some things for a sequel. But a lot of people were complaining about that online. Cole, when they're building up that he is the descendant of Scorpion's bloodline, you're like, oh, okay, when he manifests his power, my thinking was that he'll look like an updated version of Scorpion's costume. And they keep having little flashes of him as like a red ghost with like the ninja outfit on. But no, he gets a gold shirt. And a couple of nightsticks, and it just felt like they did not spend that much time on his character design. Like, he's got a gold shirt, and he has a Black Panther powers.
His ability to absorb the kinetic energy and then reverse it back on them was just something I was speculating because of the way that his suit was lit up from being impacted, but we didn't really get a big boom reaction of him blowing somebody away from absorbing that impact. So I don't even know if that was what was supposed to be happening. It was very, very unclear. His body armor, whatever you want to call it, no one ever really like stabbed him, so it was kind of hard to know, is that his power? Is he just durable? He had like little blades he could manifest. One was like a baton and one was more like a knife, but it's just so many questions. And you could have done anything with that character. He could have been interesting. He could have had diverse or interesting powers. He could have just whatever you want, anything you could imagine. There's nothing to connect this person to for us to be like, oh, well, his use of the powers were like, no, you could have done anything.
Yeah, it wasn't very satisfying. The inclusion of this character at all just wasn't very satisfying. It's very dull.
And it's interesting because some of the characters who were better written in the 95 one kind of get the short stick on this one, and vice versa. Jax is in the 95 version, but he's a blink and you'll miss it kind of character. You may not remember that he was in the film at all because he's Sonya's partner right in the beginning. Jax has a much bigger role in this film than he does in the 1995 version. But the flip side of that is that Sonya Blade, who at least had some kind of journey, some kind of character in the first movie, she's just kind of here in this one. Shockingly little story.
It wasn't even that much in the 95 one, but it still felt a little more satisfying because Kano had killed her partner. So she was personally driven to try to capture him. Not only the fact that he's a criminal that she's supposed to arrest or something like that, but also that she had a personal vendetta. At this one, it's like she's captured him for reasons at the beginning. I guess in theory, she wanted to kill him and get his mark at some point, and she does eventually end up doing it, but it's a roundabout way until that actually happens.
From the first time you see Kano on screen, just kill him now. And then, of course, you have the twist that Kano, betrays the heroes. And, oh, I was surprised by the twist when that happened. Another person who is kind of radically different between the 95 version and the 2021 would be Liu Kang. In the 95 version, Liu Kang is kind of a reluctant hero. In this one, he's definitely a side character. He's not the main protagonist of this film whatsoever, but also he's fundamentally on board with the tournament. He's very, very different the way he's written in this one.
Yeah, in the original film, he's more of a skeptic about all of it. Or at least he used to believe in this. He was trained and raised by the Temple of Light. At the beginning of that movie, he's obviously parted ways with them and is living in the modern world. And when he comes back, he's having to face all the stuff from his past and decide if it was real or not, or at least basically come to the realization that, oh yeah, this was real. In this movie, he has drunk the Kool-Aid. He's 100% on board with it. They do kind of lean into it a little bit. Like when he first arrives and he introduces himself, he puts his hand on Kano.
There's much to learn. The fuck? But not here. Follow me.
I wish that the movie had a little more postmodern stuff like that, where it's like, because this movie takes itself a little too seriously sometimes. There should be more characters making observations about how silly it is. They try to sprinkle that in there, but it doesn't land all the time with the jokes and the observations about it.
Kano was definitely well written in this film. He was used well. His character, arguably kind of a pointless one, but his interactions with the scenery, the way he kind of chewed on it, the way he bounced off other characters, he was well written and he was utilized to, I guess, the fullest extent you could use with a character like Kano. Because he's not the hero, he's not the villain, he's not a serious threat. You know he's not going to be the one who kills one of the heroes or saves the day. So I think they used him the best that they could have in this film.
Yeah, he's pretty superficial. Like he's very easily manipulated into doing things. Sonya Blade promises him $3 million that she clearly doesn't have
right
at the beginning of the movie.
And of course, he even calls her on it and still doesn't care.
And then, like, Cabal shows up in, like, the second act and is all like, if you come to the bad guys, we'll give you money too. This time I won't even tell you a number. It's just a lot of money.
He says, name your price, then double it again. It's very specific.
And he's all like, so $12 million? Very specific about he wants.
Well, then you have other characters like Kung Lao or Melina that are just kind of there. They almost get no story or explanation whatsoever. I think Melina they did dirty the most with her face, because normally in the games she's got kind of a mask where you can't really see the lower half of her jaw, but then whenever it is revealed, she's got this terrifying monster mouth. And so the first time you see her open her mouth and she's like licking a blade and she just has like some crooked teeth, it's really disappointing. It's like that's it? That's what they did with her? And then near the end of the film, you get the full reveal of her like ripping open her mouth and showing some more teeth. And again, I wonder if that was a pickup shot.
I feel like a lot of this movie could be reduced to like a sizzle reel of the very colorful characters doing things you recognize from the games and or killing each other, and the experience would be better because you wouldn't have quite so much lull time. You could cut it down to like 30 minutes of different fight scenes and things like that and be okay. Because there's just nothing really here in terms of story. Nobody feels like they have a satisfying arc. Everything rests so much on this Cole character, and he's just so boring. Like even in the 95 one, Liu Kang has something. If Liu Kang had been written in the 95 version the same way as in this version, it would be pretty bad because he would just be very bland. By having him be kind of a skeptic, he's motivated by revenge early on. He wants to fight Shang Tsung and avenge his brother. It makes it just enough of something to where you identify with the guy and you like him, and it's satisfying at the end when he stops the bad guy. In this one, Cole stops the bad guy, but you just don't care. And even then, he does so by basically channeling his ghost grandpa to come and help him fight the bad guy, help him fight Sub-Zero at the end. And it just is like, okay, it's great to see Sub-Zero in this version, and the fight scene is great. Whereas at least the fight scene is very captivating, but I don't care about Cole at all. I don't care about his involvement in it. It's just very, very unsatisfying.
And this is the long and short. We've kind of danced around this the whole time we've been talking about it, but Mortal Kombat's always been about Earthrealm and Outworld fighting in this tournament, and the whole setup has been that Earth has lost the last 9 times in a row, and if one side wins 10 tournaments in a row, then they get to take over the other one. It's dumb, whatever, that's the lore. But in this movie, they decide that instead of doing the actual tournament, they're just doing a prequel to the tournament. And then you have the concept of, well, if this is Mortal Kombat and you're killing characters, then how are you going to have them appear in the tournament later? There's a throwaway line by Shang Tsung at the end that, death's just a doorway. It's just to another place. They'll be back.
Today, you have killed my warriors, and you think you have won. But death is only another portal.
Which kind of undermines the whole film, doesn't it?
When he says that line, explicitly you see Sub-Zero's body and Goro's body disappear. Are they like some kind of hell dimension now? Will they come back with hell powers like Scorpion? Is something going to be different there? I don't know. If you're saying that death doesn't mean anything, then what's the point of Mortal Kombat?
Well, in the game, you do have fallen characters who have returned, and they're almost like zombies. It gets complicated. Like I said, the lore of Mortal Kombat is all over the place. You're not usually here because you want it to make sense. It's kind of like the fight choreography of this film. Initially, when it began, people were being slammed into walls or sustaining injuries that should be immediately lethal, instantly dead, and they just kind of bounce up and they're fine. And I felt like some of the over-the-top gore special effects was almost in response to the 1995 version. A lot of criticism at the time was that it wasn't gory enough, because one of the controversies about the game was that it was so overtly gory. Somebody gets punched and it's a bucket of blood that flies out. And I feel like this movie was much more in line with that style and over-dramatic ridiculousness of the violence. This was much more in line with what you think of when you think of a Mortal Kombat game than the last one was. The 95 one really just felt like a martial arts film, an adaptation of Mortal Kombat, as opposed to this was a more honest attempt at trying to capture the spirit of it. Arguably, though, I still think I like the 95 version better.
It's like we talked about it being emulating Enter the Dragon, which is a pretty solid martial arts film starring Bruce Lee about a tournament in which he has to go there with ulterior motives to stop a bad guy. Like, that works really well, just adapting that, and that's really what this one should have done. I do appreciate all the lore that they lean into. You know, if you're going to make a movie, double down on it. Don't try to shy away from the more fantastical elements. I do appreciate that, but yeah, it could have been executed really well. My biggest conclusion to this is that the script isn't super well thought out. They juggled a lot of things that they obviously wanted to do. There's a lot of interesting set pieces and fights and things like that, but as a story in of itself, yeah, if this was the only bit of Mortal Kombat media that existed, there were no games, no previous movies, no nothing, this came came out, you'd be like, well, that was some colorful characters, I guess, but whatever, moving on. I don't think it would have any kind of staying power.
And then at the end of the film, they obviously set it up for the conclusion. They have it set up where there's going to be more, the tournament's still coming, there's more characters who we haven't seen yet, and then they do this like dumb pan over to a poster that says Johnny Cage.
You don't see his face because they haven't cast him yet. Very obvious and cynical.
I think that the sequel will be much more interesting. It just makes me wonder, why didn't they start there? Why do the backstory? The tournament would have been more fun.
A lot of franchises are trying to emulate the MCU and build a universe and build a long narrative here. Like they want to try to make you feel like it's part of a bigger picture than it actually is. But you've got to make Iron Man first. You've got to make a solid movie first before you can build a franchise out of it. We didn't start with Iron Man 3.
If this movie had just been a Scorpion movie about his lineage and his rivalry with Sub-Zero, and just kind of about like maybe generations after generation, these two have been going at it through different descendants or through different periods of time, however you want to do that, like a Scorpion Sub-Zero movie, that could be fun. Even if it was just those two characters, that could be fun. Maybe something like that. Mm-hmm. If they're wanting to build a universe, there's smarter ways to do it than this.
I'm going to come back to that word, satisfying. This is an unsatisfying movie, I think.
Well then, the final question of the day, what would you pay for this movie?
The first time I watched it, I was like, yeah, it's fine. But upon the second viewing, it's like, nah. I think if it was on cable, I might watch it. I don't think I'd buy it. I don't need a copy of it.
My thought was, when and if a sequel to this movie does come out, and we do get that Mortal Kombat tournament, if I could get this packaged in with that follow-up movie, that's about the only time I could think of why I would want to buy this. Because as it is, it's an incomplete story, and it's not satisfying on its own. Maybe the follow-up will be fantastic, and it'll use these characters twisted in different directions, maybe turn the tournament on its head, go somewhere new with it. I'm not sure, but I feel like if this on its own is not satisfying and it's not fun to watch, that 95 Mortal Kombat movie, I could just put that on any regular Saturday and just have a good time enjoying that film. This one, I feel like the takeaway is not worth the journey.
If you have Mortal Kombat 2, the movie 2, that's actually the tournament, surprise, surprise, Liu Kang's killed in the first act. What? I wasn't expecting that. Then you could do something really interesting and take it in a different direction. That's satisfying, and it ties into this movie in a meaningful way. Then, yeah, I could see that, like picking up a copy, a Blu-ray copy with the double bill with both of them in it. Yeah, it is by itself isn't really worth it.
All right then, so what are we watching next?
Out of these two martial arts movies that we've watched that have been adaptations of pre-existing IP, we might lean into something else that's in a similar vein, but a little bit more juvenile, a little bit more genuinely Japanese instead of emulating Asian culture, and that might be...
Holy crap! I love Ninja Turtles!
No, I meant Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.